This question from I_like_licorice. I do too. Hello, DF. Hey, DF! Exclamation point. The recent ad campaign, quote unquote, "This is an Xbox," really rubbed me the wrong way. I'm one of those people who've been in the Xbox ecosystem since 360, and thus I've built a giant collection of games. Even though I own a high-end PC, it is not an Xbox since I can't install and play Peace Walker HD anytime I'd like to. Things get even more complicated when it comes to my phone. Nowadays, I play mostly on PC, but one of the cool features on Xbox are cloud saves, which go back over a decade for many of the games. It makes Xbox Series X a great emulation machine. What Microsoft really advertised are devices capable of Game Pass for cloud. Do you think people like me could ever go fully PC because our libraries will be available to install locally on a computer? Or will I always have to hang on to a quote unquote real Xbox? Thanks! Exclamation point. So this is a really interesting question, I think, because the hints from Microsoft have been basically some sort of merging of Xbox and Windows at some point. There's been talk of PC stores appearing on future Xbox consoles. We know that Microsoft is invested in a handheld console a few years out and also a Gen 10 console. But if the overall objective is Xbox everywhere, that basically means exactly what I_like_licorice is pointing out, right? Which is that you've got this digital library of games, and that library, regardless of whether it was on a console back in the day, has to run on all of these other devices. Otherwise, you don't have a coherent ecosystem, and perhaps you don't have a quote unquote Xbox. So I actually think that this is a really interesting point that's being raised here, which is that if the future of the ecosystem is to be that diverse, and if the future is essentially concentrating around some sort of adaptation or hybridization of Xbox and Windows, that backwards compatibility has to extend to the consoles. Now, is that possible? Because, obviously there's a huge licensing quagmire awaiting Microsoft if they decide to, allow old Xbox 360 or even OG Xbox games to run under Windows. Now, logistically, in terms of the technology, I see no reason why this couldn't happen. The guys who made, PowerPC Xbox 360 code run on a low power x86 processor. They're basically godlike tech wizards at that point, right? There's no reason why all of those games could not run on a modern PC. The question is whether it's viable. So this is actually a really interesting point. The concept of devices that are capable of Game Pass for cloud, I don't think that applies to laptops and desktop PCs where you'd be running native code. But Microsoft is looking to get games running on the cloud that you've bought that are not in Game Pass. I think that's actually starting to roll out now. But there's still the whole concept of the whole backwards compatibility library there. Because at some point, let's say Microsoft are going to move away from console development, in favor of PCs, for example. You've got to be able to bring that digital library with you. If you can't bring that digital library with you, then all bets are off because you could have potentially moved to PlayStation, right? Mm-hmm. And just keep your Series X or whatever. So this is kind of like the missing part of the puzzle for me, which is like, if this future is so diverse, what about the old games? What about the digital library? It's a massive question mark. Oliver, have you had any thoughts about this?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think if their future plans do involve PCs in particular, but you would have some kind of backwards compatibility solution for PC. I don't think they would leave players out in the cold at all. Perhaps that's cloud, but I'd hope, and I'd kind of expect that it would be some kind of backwards compatibility solution that would run locally on the hardware. Perhaps a more limited form of BC than you'd like because of that licensing situation. But I'd also hope that they would just give people who are on PCs, even if they don't go down that route, I'd hope they would give them some kind of backwards compatibility solution for Xbox software at some point, because even though the vast majority of Xbox Series software is available on a PC as well, the overwhelming majority indeed, there are some prominent Xbox One titles that aren't available on PC, specifically talking about titles that are from like pre-2016, pre-2017, that kind of era on Xbox One. So I'd like to see those games, and indeed Xbox 360 titles that are not available on PC either, like the older Gears of War games, for instance. So I'd certainly prefer that was the case. If they could bring some of those games over, that would be pretty neat, I think, on PC. It's less of a concern perhaps for those games that have really high quality PC ports that have been released in the last few years, for sure.
Alex, what do you think about this? Surely backwards compatibility with your existing library, it's not a job for the cloud, is it?
Yeah, no, it should not be just like a stream. That is not at all even remotely, representative of the local gameplay. I don't think. I think it's way better usually locally, unless it's like a really bad Xbox 360 game or something. I don't know, but like I don't think that's the way. But I think what you said, Rich, and what Oliver has said is that there should be, if there's this enmeshing of PC and Xbox, and nearly every device can be that, beyond the cloud streaming to phones, which I think calling that an Xbox is maybe a little bridge too far for me, regardless of streaming. I think like there needs to be a universal backwards compatibility option for Xbox, just as there is with Windows to a large degree. Windows is pretty backwards compatible up until, like 3.1 isn't there, Windows 3.1, but Windows 95 stuff still runs really, really well occasionally, not always, but you can still get it running, excluding some weird stuff. But like, yeah, I think that's the option for Xbox in the future, is some sort of universal backwards compatibility via Windows, but I'm not sure what that looks like on the disk front.
Well, the disk front is another question entirely. We talked about that last week, of course, where, the specific example being cited is if you had an Xbox One S and you upgraded to a Series S, suddenly you're locked out of a lot of your games, all of your physical disks, basically.
That's a good point.
There's got to be a solution to that. Similarly, if PlayStation evolves into an entity where they're producing consoles where there is no option for a disk drive upgrade, Similarly, you've got to be, there's got to be some sort of mechanism to ensure you can actually still play your games,
right?
Because that's just not on. Otherwise, it just doesn't really work at that point. But yeah, that's an interesting challenge ahead. I'd be really interested to see what Microsoft's preferred solution is to this, and the legal possibilities of actually being able to take those old 360 games and run them on a PC. Whether that violates some sort of licensing issue or not, whatnot. I mean, it's far less of an issue on PC generally, of course, with Steam, because games just generally tend to persist. And I suppose, the old games there would be so cheap you could just rebuy them on Steam.
Yes, yeah.
But on a sort of more general level, there's a lot of work Microsoft needs to do. The whole Play Anywhere thing needs to be sort of codified across the ecosystem. You can't just have games that don't support Play Anywhere. You've got to be able to take your saves across to different platforms. If you're now saying to people that all of these different devices are Xboxes, fundamentally they've got to act like Xboxes, and cross porting of saves is crucial to that. There's a lot of work for Microsoft here. It's kind of staggering.